Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into some pretty intense stuff, guys. We're talking unrestricted warfare.
And buckle up because our source material is, oh, let's just say it's coming from an interesting perspective.
Yeah, no kidding. We're talking about an audiobook, actually. It's on YouTube called Unrestricted Warfare Creative, right?
But here's the kicker. It was written by two Chinese military officers back in 1999.
So, not exactly your average self-help book, more like a potential glimpse into how a rival power views conflict in the 21st century, right?
Exactly. And their main point is, well, it's a bit unsettling. They're basically saying the lines between war and peace, gone. Military versus civilian, meaningless. Everything is a potential weapon.
Yeah, they don't pull any punches. So how do they even get to that point? Like, what's their reasoning?
Well, they argue that technology, it hasn't just changed how we fight wars, it's changed the whole idea of what war, even IS. Think about like the stirrup.
The stirrup, like on a horse.
Yeah. It revolutionized cavalry warfare.
Right.
Or the machine gun completely changed the game. Each of those, a huge deal on its own.
Okay, but they're saying it's not about one super weapon anymore.
Nope. Now it's about systems, networks, hitting an enemy everywhere, all at once, not just on a battlefield. That's unrestricted warfare.
So, like, what? Give me an example. What kind of weapons are we even talking about here?
Imagine a cyber attack so huge it cripples a whole country. Power grid down, hospitals offline, the works. Is that an act of war?
I mean, it's definitely an attack. But a war? I don't know.
Exactly. The lines get blurry. Or how about crashing a country's economy on purpose just by messing with financial markets?
Okay, that's straight up economic warfare, right?
See, it's not so simple anymore. They even say that these days, a hacker could be more dangerous than a nuke.
That's a chilling thought. So basically, the battlefield isn't a real place anymore.
Gone. A computer lab is now just as important as any military base. And it's not just governments doing this stuff.
You mean those non-military warriors they talk about? They even use terms like financial terrorists and call out people like George Soros.
Right. Now, we're not saying we agree with those labels or anything, but it shows how they see things. All kinds of players doing all sorts of unpredictable stuff. No rule book anymore.
Man, it's making my head spin just thinking about it. So if anything goes, how do you even fight back in this crazy unrestricted warfare world?
Well, they say the worst thing you could do is get blinded by shiny new weapons.
So no more obsession with the latest and greatest tech.
Not exactly. They have this great line, fight the fight that fits your weapons. Be smart, be adaptable, use what you've got, even the old stuff.
Wait, are we talking bringing back swords and muskets now?
Not quite. But they say even older weapons, used the right way, can still be effective. Like they actually claim a B-52 bomber loaded up with modern missiles is still a serious threat.
So it's all about mixing the old and the new, finding new ways to use what you've already got.
Exactly. Right tool for the job.
Yeah.
Even if it's been sitting in the toolbox for a while. They have this analogy.
Cool, I love a good analogy. Lay it on me.
They say getting obsessed with only the newest technology is like, imagine a master chef, right at the top of his game.
Okay, I'm picturing it. Got my chef's hat on.
Yeah.
What's he making?
Doesn't matter. The point is, he's up against a bunch of gorillas gnawing on corn cobs.
Okay, now that's an image, but I'm not quite following. Help me connect the dots here.
Sometimes brute force and just not caring about the rules, it can be surprisingly effective, even against a really skilled opponent. They use the example of, the U.S. military, all that fancy tech, but struggling against much less advanced fighters, like in Somalia.
So just because you've got the shiniest hammer doesn't mean every problem is a nail.
Exactly. And that's where unrestricted warfare takes another turn. They start talking about these military operations other than war, things you might not even think of as warfare at all.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Think like peacekeeping, disaster relief,
Huh.
even just getting your citizens out of a dangerous country, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I can see how those could get messy, but not warfare. Exactly, right?
That's what they're trying to say. The lines get blurry. Take peacekeeping.
Yeah.
You need to know the local culture, the politics, the economy. It's not just about sending in the troops.
It's more about winning people over. Like, sometimes talking is better than fighting.
Yeah. And that's where they get to this whole non-military war operations idea. They only touch on it in the book, but it's a huge deal. They're basically saying any action, anywhere, can be like war slur if it weakens your opponent.
So a trade war, right? Using
Yeah.
tariffs, sanctions, all that. It's a non-military war operation.
Exactly. Or imagine one country cuts off another from important technology, cripples them without firing a shot. The book gets into a lot of detail about those trade war tactics, and it can get nasty.
It's like a whole new battlefield with whole new weapons. But the goal is the same, come out on top, even if it means the other guy loses big time.
It's like the chessboard's gotten way bigger, and the pieces are all weird now, but the goal is still checkmate.
Okay, that's a good way to put it. So this whole cocktail of warfare, like you said before, how does that actually work in the real world?
They use the example of, remember the Iranian hostage crisis back in the 80s?
Yeah, vaguely. It was a long time ago.
Well, the U.S. response, it wasn't just a military thing, right? They used sanctions, diplomacy, even some shady stuff behind the scenes, the whole mix.
Wow, that's intense, like some next level chess match going on.
Yeah, and that's what they call super combinations. It's about mixing different levels of warfare to get what you want. They break it down into three types: supranational, superdomain, and supermeans.
Okay, you're going to have to break that down for me. What are we talking about here?
All right, so supranational is about coordinating a bunch of different players,
Hmm.
nations, those international groups, even non-state actors like those financial terrorists they were talking about.
It's a lot of moving parts. Who's even calling the shots?
That's the point. It's hard to tell. Imagine, like, a big country wants to put pressure on a rival. But instead of a full-on invasion, they use their influence to get sanctions in place while secretly backing some rebel group inside the country. It's like,
A 1-2 punch, but from multiple angles at once.
exactly. Much harder to defend against.
Yeah.
Then you've got super domain combinations. That's about fighting on all these different levels at the same time: military, economic, information, cultural, you name it.
So it's not just about who's got the bigger guns anymore. It's about controlling the story, changing people's minds, even winning over the other side's own people, right?
Exactly. If you can wreck their economy, make their government fall apart, and make their people lose hope, all without firing a shot, have you still waged war? It's a tough question.
Yeah, that's pretty deep. And it feels super relevant right now with everything going on in the world.
For sure. And that brings us to the last type, the super means combination. This is where it gets kind of scary because it's basically about using any means necessary to win, even if it seems, morally iffy.
So we're talking hacking, fake news, messing with economies on purpose, that kind of thing. Things that cause damage but don't break the traditional rules of war.
Yeah, and the thing is, whether we like it or not, this stuff works. The authors are basically saying, if you're still playing by the old rules, clinging to old ideas about what's right and wrong in this new kind of war, you're going to lose.
That's a heavy thought. So how do we balance this need to adapt and change with, our own sense of morality?
$1 million question. And honestly, the book doesn't really give us the answer. It just lays out this new reality, this new way of looking at conflict, and kind of leaves us to figure it out.
Which is kind of what makes this whole conversation so important, right? We're not just talking tactics, we're talking about the whole nature of war itself and how it's changing in ways we never imagined.
It's a conversation we can't ignore. And we'll probably be having it for a long time as the world gets crazier and more unpredictable.
For sure. We've gone through a lot. Dissolving battlefields, super combinations, and this whole idea of non-military war operations. My brain's kind of fried. But before we get totally lost, let's talk about one of the most interesting and maybe unsettling things from the book, The Side Principle Rule. Side Principle Rule. Sounds kind of ominous, doesn't it? Like something out of a spy movie.
Yeah, it does have a ring to it, but it's actually a pretty simple idea once you cut through the military jargon. Imagine a bicycle, a perfectly good bicycle, except it's missing one pedal.
Okay, that's not very useful. Unless you're into unicycling, I guess, but I'm sensing a metaphor coming on here.
You got it. It's all about how that one missing element, that side principle, can make a whole system useless.
Okay, so let's bring that back to, well, warfare, or this new unrestricted version of it we've been talking about. How does a missing bicycle pedal apply to, fighting wars?
So, the authors, they use this historical example, the Weihai campaign, back during the Chinese Civil War. It's this whole thing about how the People's Liberation Army, even though they didn't have the best weapons, they used their enemies' weaknesses against them, like they were overconfident, their supply lines were messed up, stuff like that.
So they found that missing pedal, that one thing they could exploit, and used it to win.
Exactly. It's not always about having the biggest guns, right? It's about finding that one element, that pressure point. It can change everything. A weak supply chain. Not understanding the local culture, even just relying too much on one type of communication.
Find the weak link, then break the chain. Got it. But once you've found that side principle, what then? How do you actually use it?
That's where the real creativity comes in. Remember those super combinations that we talked about?
Yeah.
Well, once you've found that weakness, that side principle, you can build a whole strategy around exploiting it. mixing military stuff, economic pressure, information warfare, whatever works.
Like building a custom weapon designed to hit them exactly where it hurts.
Exactly. Being adaptable is key. Thinking outside the box, using everything you've got, even if it seems a little unorthodox.
This whole unrestricted warfare thing, it's a lot, honestly.
Yeah.
But I'm starting to see the big picture here. It's not just about armies and weapons anymore. It's about the lines getting blurry, finding those unexpected advantages, using everything at your disposal. It's kind of scary, honestly.
Yeah, it definitely makes you think. And you know what? The book doesn't really give us easy answers. It just shows us this new reality, this new way that conflict works, and kind of leaves us to figure out what it all means.
Which I guess is why we're having this conversation, right?
Mm.
Trying to wrap our heads around it all. It's not just theory anymore.
Nope. It's the world we live in now.
So, deep divers, where does this leave us? We've learned a lot today, maybe more than we wanted to. What are we supposed to do with all this, especially those of us who aren't, generals or spies?
Well, the biggest takeaway for me is just how important it is to stay aware, pay attention, and be ready to adapt. The world's changing faster than ever, and the threats are crazier than we could have imagined.
Ignorance is not bliss anymore, that's for sure.
Definitely not. We have to know the rules of the game, even if we don't like them. And we got to be ready to adapt, because the only constant is change.
Well said. On that note, deep divers, it's time to wrap up this deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground today, maybe even started a few fires in your brains. And we hope you'll keep those fires burning, keep asking those tough questions, and keep exploring this wild world we're living in. Thanks for joining us, and catch you next time.